I assume everyone can hear me. I think I unmuted myself. Yeah, okay, great. So I want to thank Barbara for the introduction and really thank all of you guys for coming. It means a lot to see familiar faces and to see new faces as well. And that's sort of what this is all about, widening the circle, so to speak. I'm going to begin by reading from a manuscript of prose poems, however, and we'll get to the memoirs and we'll get to the Central Valley at the very end, trust me, but there's going to be a lot of distance to travel before at that point. So this book of prose poems is entitled Anecdotes from the Western Bubble. And I'm going to start with the piece called Uncle Bisbee for Anton Pickle. If Uncle Bisbee were a shoe, he'd be a single, well-worn leather shoe found in the middle of the road. If Uncle Bisbee were a building, he'd be a matchstick shack on a half-lived-on hill with a spark of copper-colored light trapped in the window. If Uncle Bisbee were weather, he'd be closet weather, musty and dank, or magnifying glass weather, the kind that dries up a puddle in 30 seconds. If Uncle Bisbee were an animal, he'd be a goat, refusing to eat anything with a human scent. The last time I saw him, Uncle Bisbee was standing barefoot in his rickety kitchen with a bushy beard, showing me a piece of art he had made from the ashes of a burned manuscript. Listen to this, he said, pointing at his dusty stereo. It's a recording of desert monks singing the old nihilism in mono. And this is Banjo Sam. If only we hadn't plundered so far south of the bloodline, the bone line, the rhythm versus melody line. But we couldn't help ourselves. Killers keep looking for new impossibilities to kill them, then study them, then resurrect them. Don't hoot and play, don't shoot and pray, don't leave me alone in the dusty palace with the Paris sessions blaring. I'm blaming my sad misfortune on a cruel Black woman. Why didn't she love me the way she loved the other white boys? Now come here, make haste. Old Feelgood has a smile on his face. Call me Banjo Sam, the erotica man. Oboe, trash can cymbals, elegiac trumpet. Put me in a prison museum on the equator, where equating anything to anything can never explain what I am. And this is Eyebrows Over America for Oliver Bills, who might be online, I'm not sure. America will kick your ass, and mine too. We're finished, done, like a mafia don with an E for extraneous tacked on to the end of his title, no longer swelling out of the orchestra pit like a cinematic cowboy with a finely lit jaw. You can ink that or smear it, it doesn't matter. Once the kids start wearing camouflage and the trumpet blasts from evangelical bird-brained born-agains rat-a-tat-tat through shopping malls, all that's left is mop-up and relocation plans. I can't stop thinking about the old camper I saw in a museum, the one John Steinbeck drove to get away from his own time's madness as fast as four wheels could carry him. The last piece I'm going to read from this manuscript is Ode to Santa Cruz, beach town near here, for Lou Harrison and Other Music. Other Music was a music ensemble. Okay, Ode to Santa Cruz. Angels with hairy armpits listening to psychedelic gamelan in 1980s beach town, California. One-size-fits-all redwoods, libraries beyond the surf, University of shaggy music lovers, sea creatures with artificial hips and false knees and hair so luxurious they make movies about it. I hear Lou Harrison's Pacifica Rondo playing so loud in a passing car that the tower at Tor House shoots into the sky like a rocket. Santa Cruz, oh Santa Cruz. I have a Lou Harrison beard and very little to show for it. Nothing like his music for miniature Chinese percussionists who sneeze into their elbows and sit like fading ink characters in rice paper surf, who worked on the railroad like Harry Parch and Jack Who Cares a Whack. Man, oh man, how far did I have to go to say, here I am asleep on the beach, a million miles above the sand, sweating in the sunbeams above Sick Body Beach, above Dead Body Bay. Close my eyes, shut my mouth, give me a little push out to sea. Pizzicato and bricks, bricks and songs, songs all fall down. A percussionist with an orchard in her eardrum beckons to me as I run over the low tide toward the sunken ship, the rotting tooth, the smiling reptile with a death grip on our genetic code, fireworks in a twister of smoke. Okay, I'm going to change gears and read from this, what I'm calling a creative memoir. It's called My Mother's Tree, and it's really was started when my mother passed away in 2015. And it's the sections work where they alternate in voice. The one section's the son's voice, one section's the mother's voice, son's voice, mother's voice, etc. I'm going to read a section in the son's voice, a section from a piece in the son's voice, and the piece is called Ike Crow. And this is the very beginning, just a page and a half of a much longer piece. The first time Henrietta Variable Crow heard her husband suggest they name their son Icarus, stories started tumbling around in her head like fractured points of light in a kaleidoscope. With a name like that, she thought, with mounting excitement, her son's life would surely be as beautiful and as tragic as the operas she loved to listen to every Sunday, which reminded her that an enchanted creature might float through the rafters at any time, touch you on the shoulder, and change everything. Sitting at the kitchen table, she felt the blazing light of Icarus radiate through all the cells of her body. The power of the Icarus story surged through her, and for a moment she felt like its creator, its source, the wellspring from which mythic transformation gushed into human lives. Of course my son will fly, she told her bewildered friends. He'll fly because I say he can fly. I could make fields of sheep fly with the snap of my fingers, continents of snakes, towers of bread, rows of priest caskets. You name it, I could make it fly with one eye poked out and 9 knuckles blown apart and scattered to the 14 corners of the abstract and illuminated world. Yes, her staunch one step at a time husband had taken her by surprise. She was the one with the windy imagination, the flying heart. When he said, let's name our son Icarus Crow, she thought it was a grand gesture of kindness and understanding. But that wasn't what Rufus had in mind at all. Icarus will be our little joke, he explained, while Henrietta was nursing Ike. I don't give a rat's ass about your mythic gibberish. I just think the two names sound good together. We'll call him Ike Crow, our little Ike, so he can be a boy like any other boy. I started making up stories like this about Ike Crow shortly before my mother died. That I did this while she was in the hospital, and that I continued making up these stories in my head and even writing them down as she became sicker and sicker is as perplexing as it is embarrassing. For a while, I thought Ike Crow would bring us together. Imagining I was Scheherazade, reading my mother a new story every night as she lay in bed, propped up on a pile of soft pillows. The playful, inventive language suggesting metamorphosis and constant transformation would keep her curious and distracted and alive for months or years even. The only problem with this optimistic worldview was my mother. She didn't like fiction, hadn't read it for years. She was only interested in real things that happened to real people in real places and times. In other words, news and biography, but not her biography. She didn't talk about that very much. Makes sense, I realize now. You need to believe in fiction before you can talk about your own life. Okay, now we're shifting yet again to a piece called Crude Origami. This is really kind of personal essays that all circle around travel one way or another. This is the very last piece in the manuscript, and the travel in this piece is simply walking the dogs around the block. So it narrows down at the very end to the simplest domestic activity. And it's called Around the Block Again. The homeless guy on Berryman kept staring at me and the dogs and shaking his fist, but he didn't come any closer. Still, I was upset. This is one of the safest neighborhoods that Trump.com America can produce. I mean safe on both sides of the line. If you're an old white man out walking your dogs after midnight, and if you're a black kid on a jog a few miles away from home. I turned right on Bonita. The political pundit and university professor Robert Reich lives a few houses down the street in a small Mediterranean-style home with a walled-in garden and a tiny wrought iron balcony overlooking a creek. I like his thinking, his ability to explain complicated issues with clarity and passion. I also like seeing him walking around the neighborhood, dressed down in old jeans and a tattered sweater. I don't know what's going on with my own political thinking. On the one hand, I care less and less. On the other, I'm more and more angry. When we first moved to Berkeley, I was dumbfounded. How could we have landed in such a beautiful place? I shared photo after photo with my less fortunate friends, documenting the wondrous variety of homes, the lush gardens, the views of the bay, the Golden Gate, the city, Mount Tamalpais. I shared pictures of my older daughter's school with a poetry garden and a sign informing everyone that Allen Ginsberg's famous strange new cottage in Berkeley had been across the street, where a dilapidated 1970s era apartment building now stands. And I shared pictures of my younger daughter's Hilltop School, a grand English country estate looking building with views of the bay and the Golden Gate Bridge, where both Philip K. Dick and Ursula K. Le Guin had been students. I don't know why I kept hounding my friends like this. Stop it, I said. Nobody cares. Finally, after all these years, I've turned those thoughts around. Why shouldn't everybody live in a neighborhood full of quaint old homes, with good schools, great grocery stores, bookstores, libraries, record stores, restaurants, music venues, surrounded by nature protected from development, or whatever their own fantasy lists might be? As I got closer to the top of Bonita, I heard a mysterious rattling, thudding noise. I stopped and tried to locate it, to put a name on it. Then I saw the string of white party lights hanging on the deck of the house at the corner and remembered that the washer and dryer were kept outside. They were doing a late night load. And I remembered that this was the house where a young boy committed suicide almost 15 years ago. His name was Gulliver, and he was 14 years old. But I don't remember what he looked like, or if I had ever noticed him or thought about him before he died. It's a shock when someone that young dies. It must have been an accident, I always think, no matter the circumstances. When I was in 6th grade, one of my best friends, Tim Young, was running around the track for PE like the rest of us, complaining about the afternoon heat when he collapsed and died of a brain aneurysm. I've never seen ghosts or felt haunted by anything, except by the absence of Tim Young. He was a little overweight with messy hair. We were in Boy Scouts together. We rode our bikes to school. We swam in his pool and teased his little sister. His death felt like a practical joke, like he was following me around the neighborhood, hiding behind a tree or a car every time I spun around and tried to catch him. A few years after Gulliver died, his mother, Dale, started dating a man named Ed, who had miraculously been my roommate in San Francisco more than 30 years earlier. Suddenly, Ed was riding his bike up and down our street, waving hello, playing harmonica, and singing baritone ballads. He reminded me of William Saroyan riding his famous black bicycle around the streets of Fresno when I was a kid. not caring what anybody thought or whether anyone recognized him, or even if he got hit by a car driven by a mostly blind grandmother or a half-stoned teenager. A few days ago, I learned that Dale had just died from some kind of cancer. I should know what kind of cancer it was, but I don't. I wish I had made more of an effort to get to know her. Once I went to the monthly sing, say, play get-together she hosted. I read some poetic prose. Everyone else sang a folk song or played a folk tune or told a folk tale. Ed and I had another roommate, Anthony, who over the years has become one of my best friends. Just today, he called from the old mining town of Bisbee, Arizona, where he settled after being forced out of the Bay Area, to say that he had finally finished the novel he had been working on and had fallen into a deep depression. He said the heat hit early this year, and even in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, the outdoor bars down the hill were blaring bad music by cut-rate cover bands playing for tourists. When I got to Dale's house, I did something I almost never do. Rather than turning left on YOLO and going home, I turned right, deciding for no reason whatsoever to make another loop around the block. This time around, the air had a sharp smell to it, like someone had been riding their brakes all the way down the hill from the rose garden. The clouds parted and the moonlight was sharp-edged and confrontational. I made it back to the Madeline school and stopped to let the puppy pee. This was almost exactly the spot where a different set of dogs, one of which had died a couple years ago and was now buried in our backyard, had ripped the leashes out of my hands and chased two possums down the sidewalk until they simply fell over dead on the grass. The dogs sniffed the dead possums for a few seconds, then lost interest. I finished my walk, put the dogs inside, and hurried back up the street. The possums were gone. Not even a broken leaf of grass to mark where they had fallen. I knew they had been there, but I no longer believed what I knew to be true. All right, thank you. I'm going to read just one or two really short poems out of the Wilson Wiley variations. These are the couple Fresno poems. Little T. Under a weed puller's gaze. Under a weed puller's gaze, she ran the bean fields, crossed the soft highway, eyes shifting upwards to brain, mind down to hands and feet, out to fists of blackbirds pounding young almond trees. She ran through the hacienda lobby, through the Armenian market, to the camps on the edge of town, ran through the red house of the Nebraska horse doctor, rivers of orange blossom pollen dust blackening to sludge swirled in the noon sky behind her. And finally, the people-packed hills. See if I can read this with the light. People-packed hills. Thick fog rolls over the people-packed hills of San Francisco. Lanes of sun fire up the gray folds, illuminating metal edges. Had I stayed in Fresno, I might have become a crippled drunk in a '64 Chevy Impala pulling pavement. A neon blur stretching down Belmont Avenue, hot night end to hot night end. I might have wandered irregular ditch banks around shopping malls, looking for the hobo in the fig orchard. Landlocked in shell of stucco, with no window and no door in the squat horizon, sitting in a Chevy Blazer on Blackstone at the edge of town, waiting. Thank you all very much.